2 humans have ever traveled down there to be the next person to explore the deepest depths of the ocean.
200 miles southwest of Guam, in a crescent-shaped scar on the floor of the western Pacific, the seabed drops away into the deepest hole on Earth, the Mariana Trench. It bottoms out in a place called Challenger Deep, named for the British survey ship that first sounded it in 1875 with nothing more than a hemp rope and a weight of iron. The most recent measurement, taken in 2020 by a pressure sensor mounted to a submersible called the limiting factor, places the deepest point at 10,935 m below the surface of the sea, roughly 36,000 feet, almost 7 miles straight down. That is more than a kilometer deeper than Mount Everest is tall. The water there sits 1 degree above freezing. The pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres, 16,000 pounds per square inch. There is no sunlight. There has not been sunlight at that depth for as long as multicellular life has existed on this planet. For most of the 20th century, marine biology had a confident answer about what was happening at the bottom of that hole: nothing, or very close to it. The deepest trenches were assumed to be slow, sparse deserts at the bottom of the world, a place where the rare scraps of dead matter drifting down from miles above provided the only food, where the rare, specialized scavengers eked out an existence on biochemistry pushed to its absolute limit. That assumption was not based on observation. It was based on the fact that nobody could get down there long enough to look. And then, over the past 15 years, a new generation of submersibles and baited landers quietly changed that. The cameras got better. The pressure hulls got stronger. The observation times stretched from minutes to hours to entire days. The footage that came back has rewritten what science thought it knew about life at the limits of survival on Earth. Most of that footage the public has never seen. What the cumulative record from the bottom of the trench is now starting to show, and what creatures have been documented swimming at depths where biochemistry says fish should be impossible, are the central questions. Why the assumption that the deepest place on Earth was an empty wasteland has collapsed under a decade of evidence almost nobody outside the research community has watched is the other. Together, these findings place a previously unreachable section of the western Pacific seabed at the center of the most significant reassessment of deep ocean biology in over 100 years. The cameras went down, the footage came back, and what was waiting for them on the bottom should not, according to everything we thought we knew, be alive at all. To understand why the footage is so significant, you first have to understand why almost no one had ever seen it. The Hadal Zone, the layer of ocean below 6,000 m, is the least visited environment on Earth. More people have walked on the surface of the moon than have descended to the bottom of Challenger Deep. The reason is brutal physics. At sea level, you carry 1 atmosphere of pressure on your shoulders, the weight of all the air above you. For every 10 m you descend into the ocean, the pressure adds 1 more atmosphere. At the bottom of Challenger Deep, the pressure passes 1,000 atmospheres. At that pressure, the human body would not be crushed slowly. It would be crushed instantly. Standard military submarines rated to a few hundred meters would implode. Even purpose-built deep-sea vehicles push the boundaries of what materials science can hold together. The first humans to reach the bottom were Jacques Picard and Don Walsh, descending in the Bathyscaphe Trieste in January 1960. The descent took nearly 5 hours. They spent about 20 minutes on the bottom, during which the sediment kicked up by their landing obscured nearly everything they had come to see. For 52 years after that, no human went back. Robotic vehicles fared a little better, and music paid a heavy price. The Japanese remotely operated vehicle Keiko reached the bottom in 1995. It was lost at sea in 2003. The American hybrid vehicle Nereus reached Challenger Deep in 2009. It imploded in the Chromatic Trench in 2014. The Hadal Zone kept destroying the machine sent to study it. So, the consensus that the deepest ocean was a biological desert was not a conclusion drawn from extensive evidence. It was a guess, a reasonable-sounding guess built on a clean piece of logic. Photosynthesis is impossible below the depth where sunlight reaches, which runs out around 200 m. Below that, every calorie of food has to fall from above. Dead plankton, fish carcasses, the slow, steady drift of organic debris that oceanographers call marine snow. The deeper you go, the less of that snow survives the trip. Most of it is consumed or decomposed before it ever reaches the bottom. By the time you reach Hadal depth, the reasoning went, almost nothing edible should be left. So, whatever lived down there had to be slow, sparse, and starving. It was a reasonable theory. It was almost completely wrong. The breakthrough came not from a submarine, but from something much simpler: a lander. A lander is essentially a weighted steel frame carrying lights, cameras, and bait. You drop it overboard. It sinks to the seafloor. It films whatever shows up. Hours later, on a timer, it releases its weights and floats back to the surface for recovery. Landers do not need a pilot. They do not need a viewport rated to 1,000 atmospheres. They can be deployed cheaply, repeatedly, in trench after trench, and they can stay on the bottom long enough to record what is actually there, not just what happens to be visible in the brief window of a crude descent. Beginning in the early 2000s, marine biologist Alan Jameson, now at the University of Western Australia, started using landers landers systematically across every major hadal trench on the planet. The Mariana, the Kermadec, the Japan Trench, the Tonga, the Philippine, the Isagasawa off Japan. The footage these landers brought back broke the model. The first thing the cameras showed was that the bottom was not empty. It was crowded. Within minutes of a lander touching down on the sediment, animals began to arrive. Within an hour, the bait was being torn apart. The dominant scavengers were amphipods, pale shrimp-like crustaceans, some species growing to nearly 30 centimeters long at hadal depths. They appeared in numbers that contradicted every assumption about a food-starved ecosystem. Single traps deployed at over 8,000 m in the Tonga Trench have come back, containing more than 17,000 individuals. 17,000 in one trap. These were not sluggish, energy-conserving creatures waiting passively for the rare meal. They were a swarm, and they were hungry. In the Mariana Trench, specifically, the dominant amphipod is a species called Hirandelia gigas. It lives at the deepest point on Earth. It has been recovered from sediment at more than 10,900 m. And when researchers looked at what it could digest, they found something nobody had expected. It produces a cellulase enzyme that can break down plant fiber, wood, leaves, terrestrial debris that has fallen into the ocean and eventually drifted miles down to the trench floor. A crustacean at the bottom of the deepest ocean on Earth had evolved the chemistry to digest driftwood. The amphipods were not the only thing the cameras saw. They were just the loudest tenants of a building science had not known existed. Then came the fish. For decades, the scientific consensus said fish could not survive below approximately 8,000 m. The reason was not food. The reason was biochemistry. Under extreme pressure, proteins denature. They lose the three-dimensional shapes that let them function. Cell membranes stiffen. The molecular machinery that keeps a complex animal alive simply stops working. Deep-sea fish have evolved partial workarounds, specialized proteins, pressure-tolerant cell membranes, and reduced bone structure. But scientists thought there was a hard ceiling. Below 8,000 m, no adaptation should be enough. In 2014, Jameson's team filmed a small, pale, gelatinous fish swimming on the bottom of the Mariana Trench at approximately 8,145 m. It was snailfish, small, translucent, unassuming, built more like a tadpole than the toothy nightmares of deep-sea documentaries. In 2017, they filmed another at 8,178 m. Later expeditions formally described it as a new species, Pseudoliparus music swirii, named for a sub-lieutenant on the original HMS Challenger expedition. The Mariana snailfish was, at the time, the deepest fish ever filmed alive. Then, in August 2022, a music research team filmed a juvenile snailfish in the Isagasawa Trench off Japan at a depth of 8,336 m. That fish is now the deepest vertebrate ever recorded. A few days later in the same expedition, two specimens of a related species, music, were captured at 8,022 m, the deepest fish ever physically retrieved from the sea. Marine biologist Mackenzie Geringer, who studied the Mariana snailfish at the University of Washington and later at SUNY Geneseo, dissected the chemistry of how these fish are holding together at that depth. The key molecule is trimethylamine N oxide, known as TMAO. TMAO stabilizes proteins against pressure. Deep-sea fish accumulated in their tissues in concentrations proportional to the depth they live at. The deeper the fish, the more TMAO. The hadal snailfish had the highest concentrations ever measured in any fish on Earth. But here is the catch. TMAO has a ceiling of its own. Beyond a certain concentration, it stops stabilizing proteins and starts disrupting them. The math says that ceiling is reached somewhere between 8,200 m and 8,500 m. The Isagasawa snailfish at 8,336 m is sitting on that ceiling. It may be the deepest a vertebrate can physically exist on this planet, not because there is no food down there, but because chemistry itself runs out of room. The footage of that small transparent fish nosing past a baited camera at the absolute limit of vertebrate life is one of the most quietly extraordinary recordings in the history of biology. And the snailfish is not even the strangest thing the cameras have seen. The hadal zone is not one environment. It is a collection of them. Each trench is geologically isolated, like an island chain in reverse, separated from its neighbors by abyssal plains that the deepest specialists cannot cross. Each one has evolved its own community, its own endemic species, its own ecological balance. The Mariana alone has produced footage of fields of xenophyophores, giant single-celled organisms, some larger than a human fist, building intricate structures out of cemented sediment grains. They are individually among the largest cells known to science, and there are thousands of them on the trench floor. There are sea cucumbers crawling across the sediment, slowly digesting the organic film that coats every grain. There are translucent polychaete worms, pressure-adapted starfish relatives, and unidentified jelly-bodied creatures that appear briefly on camera and have never been formally classified because no one has caught one alive. In 2024 and 2025, an international project called the Mariana Trench Environment and Ecology Research Initiative, TERI for short, released the most comprehensive microbial survey ever taken from the Hadal Zone. The team conducted 33 submersible dives and collected more than 1,600 sediment samples between 6,000 and 10,900 m. When they sequenced the DNA, the result was staggering: 7,564 microbial species. Almost 90% of them had never been described before. The single largest expansion of the catalog tree of life that has come out of a single environment in recent memory was sitting on the floor of one trench, doing the unglamorous work of being alive in a place we had assumed was uninhabitable. And the microbes had adaptations the surface world had never seen. Streamlined genomes optimized for extreme nutrient scarcity. Oversized genomes packed with metabolic flexibility. Enzymes that break down carbon monoxide for energy. Upgraded DNA repair systems that may have evolved to cope with pressure-induced damage. The deepest place on Earth was not a desert. It was a city hiding under a kilometer of water and a century of false assumptions, which raised the obvious question: how? If the food supply is supposed to be vanishingly thin at Hadal depths, how are these communities surviving, let alone thriving? The answer turns out to involve at least three things the old model had underway. First, food reaches the bottom faster and in larger pulses than the steady drizzle marine snow model assumed. Whale falls, large fish carcasses, sudden mass deaths of surface organisms after blooms or storms. These reach the trench floor as concentrated parcels of nutrition that scavengers can consume in days and store as energy for months. Second, the shape of a trench works like a funnel. Organic material drifting down across a wide area of ocean surface gets channeled toward the narrow seabed below. The Mariana receives disproportionately more food than a flat patch of ocean floor at the same depth would, simply because of geometry. Third, and most surprising, some of the energy down there is not coming from the surface at all. Microbial communities in trench sediment appear to be performing chemosynthesis, pulling energy from chemical reactions in the seafloor itself, using compounds seeping from the underlying crust as fuel. Carbon is being fixed without ever touching sunlight, which means the Hadal food web is not entirely dependent on what falls from above. Part of it is generating its own foundation in the dark from the rocks. That is not how Earth life was supposed to work at the bottom of the ocean. It is, however, how Earth life is now confirmed to work at the bottom of the ocean. While the landers were quietly accumulating most of the actual science, the deep ocean was also producing some of the most expensive home video in human history. In March 2012, the filmmaker James Cameron descended solo in a custom-built submersible called the Deep Sea Challenger. He became the third human ever to reach the bottom of Challenger Deep and the first to do it alone. He spent about 3 hours on the seafloor. Equipment failures cut his bottom time short, but his cameras documented the terrain in unprecedented detail: sediment, ridges, and faint signs of life moving at the edge of the lights. In 2019, the explorer and former naval officer Victor Vescovo went deeper. As part of the 5 Deeps expedition, a private project to reach the deepest point of every ocean basin, Vescovo piloted the limiting factor down to Challenger Deep 3 separate times. His recorded depth surpassed every previous measurement. He spent hours on the bottom on multiple dives. To date, fewer than 30 people have ever been to Challenger Deep. More humans have orbited or walked on the moon. And during one of his dives, sitting on the sediment 7 miles below the surface, Vescovo's cameras saw something that did not belong to any species on Earth: a plastic bag, candy wrappers, fragments of foil. Subsequent sampling expeditions have confirmed it. Microplastics are present in the sediment at the bottom of Challenger Deep. They have been recovered from the digestive tracts of the same Hirandelia gigas amphipods that have been thriving down there for tens of millions of years. The deepest place on Earth, reached by only a handful of humans across more than 60 years, is now contaminated with our garbage. The same ocean currents that deliver marine snow to the Hadal Zone have delivered the residue of our consumer economy. The creatures that evolved to survive pressure that would crush a tank are now eating polyethylene. It is one of the most quietly devastating findings in modern marine biology. We have not finished discovering what lives at the bottom of the ocean. We have already started polluting it. The research continues. The Schmidt Ocean Institute's vessel Falker has run multiple expeditions to the Mariana and surrounding trenches, deploying high-definition cameras and sampling tools at Hadal. Music Depth. JAMSTEC, the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, continues its decades-long program of mapping and biology in the Western Pacific. The Chinese submersible Fendu's has performed dozens of full ocean depth dives. Caledon Oceanic, founded by Vescovo, has logged more time at the bottom of Challenger Deep than every previous expedition in history combined. The species inventory grows with every cruise. New amphipods, new snailfish, new sea cucumbers, polychaetes, foraminiferans, and single-celled organisms that do not yet fit into any branch of the taxonomic tree. In 2023, a previously unknown virus was isolated from sediment at 8,900 m in the Mariana, the deepest virus ever recovered from anywhere anywhere on Earth. Each expedition adds more entries to the catalog. Each lander deployment captures hours of behavior that has never been witnessed before. The picture that is emerging is not the slow, sparse desert that 20th century biology assumed. It is one of the densest, unexplored ecosystems on the planet, and the implications run further than the trench itself. If complex life can flourish at 1,000 atmospheres of pressure in absolute darkness, on a food supply that ought to be insufficient, then the conditions thought to make life impossible on Europa, the moon of Jupiter, or Enceladus, the moon of Saturn, may not actually make life impossible. Both moons are believed to harbor liquid water oceans beneath their ice shells. Both oceans, if they exist, would be cold, dark, high pressure, and isolated from sunlight. Exactly the conditions where, until recently, Earth biology was supposed to fail. The Mariana Trench is the closest analog we have to those alien oceans, and the Mariana Trench is full of life. NASA's astrobiology programs now explicitly reference Hadal research when calibrating expectations for what their missions might find under the ice of other worlds. The footage from the bottom of the trench has become accidentally a preview of what alien biology might look like. There are practical implications closer to home, too. The biochemistry that lets these organisms function at extreme pressure is a library of innovations that human industry is just beginning to read. Pressure-stable enzymes, cold-tolerant catalysts, DNA repair systems that may have applications in medicine and space travel. The microbes alone, with their carbon monoxide metabolism and their unique cellular bases, represent potential breakthroughs in biotechnology that we cannot yet quantify. The deepest place on Earth turns out to be one of the most valuable. The cameras keep going down. Every year, the landers and the submersibles add more hours of footage to a record that 15 years ago did not exist. The Hadal Zone is being mapped, cataloged, and slowly understood one descent at a time. The old assumption is dead. The deepest ocean is not empty. It is not slow. It is not a wasteland. It is a habitat, hostile by every human standard, built on chemistry that pushes biological tolerances to their absolute limit, filled with organisms that have evolved in darkness for hundreds of millions of years, that have never seen sunlight, that cannot survive in the ocean above them any more than a deep-sea diver can survive theirs, and they are thriving. Snailfish, at the chemical edge of vertebrate life, swimming calmly past lights that no fish at their depth has ever encountered before. Amphipods, swarming bait in their thousands at the bottom of the deepest hole on Earth. Microbial communities so diverse that one expedition expanded the known tree of life by nearly 7,000 species. A virus living at 8,900 m, a plastic bag. The Mariana Trench, the place the 20th century science assumed was barely alive, is one of the busiest and most diverse environments ever documented on this planet. The question is no longer whether life exists at the limits. The question is what else is down there that we have not yet seen. The cameras keep going down. The footage keeps coming back, and every time it tells us the same thing. Everything we believed about the boundaries of life on Earth was wrong. The trench is alive all the way to the bottom.